The cracks in the system are widening, and the shift is no longer happening quietly. Moscow just floated a plan to link the digital currency settlement rails of Russia, China, and India, effectively creating a parallel pipeline for cross-border payments outside Western control. The idea came from Anatoly Aksakov, chair of Russia's State Duma Committee on Financial Markets, in an interview with Vesti FM. His pitch: connect the country's information systems so a digital ruble could auto-convert to digital yuan or digital rupee at market rates, with transactions moving inside those rails rather than through commercial banks. If that happens, he argued, outside observers wouldn't see the transfers, conversion frictions would drop, and trade would speed up without SWIFT as an intermediary. China already has a working digital yuan, ECNY, in pilot at scale. India is rolling out the digital rupee more aggressively. Russia's digital ruble infrastructure is in motion. Stitch those together, Aksakov says, and you get a settlement fabric designed for currency conversion without third-party choke points, plus fewer compliance bottlenecks for exporters and importers. In theory, that means faster deals, fewer blocked wires, and tighter economic links across the three biggest economies inside the BRICS bloc. The stakes are obvious. For over 7 decades, the US dollar has anchored global trade and finance. As of late 2024, it still accounts for nearly 60% of global FX reserves. That dominance doesn't vanish overnight. But it can be chipped at, especially when governments build new plumbing that roots around US legal and banking jurisdiction. That motivation hardened in 2022, when Washington froze hundreds of billions in Russian sovereign reserves after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Across the global south, the lesson landed: if that can happen to a nuclear power, any reserve holder is exposed. Europe later moved to use interest on Russia's immobilized assets to support Ukraine, reinforcing the point that dollar and eurozone custody comes with political risk. So BRICS governments have been laying foundations for something different, not a copy-paste of SWIFT, but alternative rails that are harder to sanction. At the center is BRICS Pay, a decentralized, open-source cross-border payment network aimed at settling in national currencies rather than the dollar. Unlike SWIFT's messaging monopoly, each member could run its own node, set fees near zero, and interoperate across domestic systems already in use. On paper, BRICS Pay would knit together Russia's SPFS, China's CIPS and Union Pay, India's UPI, and Brazil's PIX, creating a backbone that can process high-throughput message traffic with fewer Western dependencies. Progress is incremental, but the direction is clear. Moscow says roughly 90% of its BRICS trade now settles in national currencies. India and China have expanded rupee-yuan deals. Brazil is exploring real-based settlement. It's not a direct attack on the dollar, yet, but it is a practical move toward multipolar finance. Washington isn't shrugging. The U.S. has warned, and in recent statements from Trump, threatened steep tariffs, including 100% on any country adopting a joint BRICS currency and additional levies on systems labeled anti-American. The pressure raises political risk across BRICS capitals. But it also hardens resolve to keep building workarounds. One result, the single BRICS currency idea has faded as impractical, replaced by a modular strategy, more bilateral trade in local money, stronger domestic payment systems, and a gradual BRICS Pay build-out. No one credible says this flips in a year. A true end-to-end alternative to SWIFT and dollar clearing could take decades. But for the first time since 1-2, the architecture itself is being re-engineered, step by step, system by system. Why it matters to a U.S. audience: sanctions leverage erodes as more transactions move on rails the U.S. can't see or block. FX demand shifts if more trade invoices in yuan, rupees, or rubles, reducing automatic dollar bid. Compliance visibility thins for banks and regulators when settlement flows don't touch correspondent accounts in New York. Pricing power diffuses. Fewer single points of failure means more negotiating leverage for counterparties outside the West. There's also a technology angle. Programmable digital currencies can embed rules, settlement windows, escrow conditions, tax logic at the protocol layer. If cross-border platforms standardize those features outside Western rule sets, the governance center of gravity shifts too. That's a standards war as much as a payments war. Reality check. The dollar remains dominant in energy, shipping finance, derivatives, and reserves, and U.S. market depth is unmatched. But the direction of travel is what's new. The goal isn't to kill the dollar, it's to lower dependence on it enough that U.S. policy risk, asset freezes, secondary sanctions, banking blockades, no longer threatens national survival. Expect near-term moves to be practical, not dramatic. More local currency swap lines and FX windows between central banks. Wider acceptance of CIPS/UPI/PIX bridges for specific commodity and consumer goods lanes. Pilot corridors where ECNY, digital rupee, and digital ruble settle trade invoices with automatic conversion and on-chain audit, visible to the parties, invisible to outsiders. Incremental merchant and bank integrations that make these rails a default option rather than an exception. The open question isn't if the dollar faces more competition, it already does. It's how soon that competition becomes material, and how prepared Washington is when the marginal trade no longer needs a dollar leg. That's where policy choices on tariffs, secondary sanctions, export controls, and correspondent banking either slow or speed the pivot away. Bottom line, the next phase of geopolitics runs through payment pipes. If Russia, China, and India can interlink their digital currency systems and make settlement in national money friction light, they don't need a big ceremonial BRICS currency to weaken dollar gravity. They just need the rails. Those rails are being laid, quietly, deliberately, and with a long clock in mind.